on any given day, law enforcement all across the country and right here in East Texas can take dozens of reports of missing persons. Fortunately, in this age of technology, alerts and searches can be quickly enacted, but details are critical. KLTV7's Bob Hallmark explains.
On any given week, Longview police get numerous reports of missing persons, children, adults, and elderly.
First thing that you should do is to contact local law enforcement, okay? Make them aware of what's going on and the fact that you think that they are missing.
Their most recent case of a missing elderly man was resolved with the individual being found safe and unharmed. Social media being a huge help in missing persons cases. Social media, cell phones, and mobile news apps delivering notifications of Amber Alerts and Silver Alerts.
When we find out someone's missing, is we broadcast it on social media, and that helps us to find that person.
And just as details are important in any police investigation, they are extremely important in a missing persons case.
Recent pictures of the person and a license plate number if they have a car.
Details matter. Put a list together of all the people that might know them or places that they might go. Know what they're wearing when you last saw them. If they're wearing a particular ring or if they have earrings in certain ears but not in other ears. Small things like that can help our investigations.
And time is a factor.
A lot of those kind of details, minor details that people might not think about right now would be important.
Bob Hallmark, KLTV 7 News.
And Thornton says social media alerts and searches have been a big help for law enforcement when it comes to finding missing people.